Good afternoon. I am Bill Oberndorf. I serve on JEB's board and have been involved in school choice now for over 20 years. So it's wonderful to be here at this gathering and just a great turnout. A lot of different forms of education efforts are taking place across the country. And we're finding that by changing laws, changing regulations, we are really able to change the landscape. Certainly the trigger laws and the effect that they're having now in process of being looked at in over 30 states are a important development. And we have a panel today that will be focusing on that particular issue and opportunity, as well as the important role that parents and parents who are beneficiaries of choice and change can have in creating a more robust level of engagement and sustaining programs that are already in place. So with no further ado, our panel will now come out, please.
By October, we saw petitioners start to gather outside the school. They would pull up in cars and get out with their petitions and walk up to groups of parents and engage them in conversations. And so it was pretty much full-blown by about October.
We need to find more parents. So the focus of the work will be on finding new people.
I talked to other parents, just like they came and talked to me. I try to tell them, the difference and about the new law. It's not easy. I mean, there's some parents that they're like, oh, there's just talking. That's not true. That's not going to happen here in Compton.
A lot of parents are scared. I have to be honest, I was scared. I was scared of, well, maybe the school will be mad, or maybe they'll be mad at my daughter, or, but I have to think of the bigger picture. When all of this is done, my daughter will have the quality education that she deserves. Like, I didn't really discuss with her what I was doing. And I'll say, Mom, let me call you back, I have a meeting. Mom, I'm going to this. Mom, I have a press conference. She said, are you running for mayor? I said, no, I'm not running for mayor. And I finally told her what I was doing. And last night she was like, oh my God, I'm your biggest fan. And she said, think about what Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, think about what those people did to change history.
You may be seated in the presence of the Lord. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Christ, amen.
I believe that education is the civil rights issue of the day, and that the disparity in our country now, where people are educated or not educated. 38 years ago, we found the need to organize our own private Christian school in order to deal with what was going on in Compton School District at the time. And it's really ironic that 38 years later, those conditions are still with us. It really thrills me just to know that parents are making a concerted effort to bring change. And so we open our doors and ask them to come in. They need a safe place in order to think, to strategize, and to organize themselves, and they need to feel, hey, there's a place in this community that we can go and talk with one another and feel like, hey, we belong.
I'm just stunned at how devastated this community is by the economic crisis that we're in right now. Within a given dozen people, you'll find one after the other kind of, sink and blow the waves in some ways. It's the credit of the parents who've gotten involved in this and stayed with the organizing that they've managed to hang together and keep it going in spite of that.
I want to thank everyone for supporting each other. And like they said, we're going to stand up and until the end and hope for the best.
I just want to say thank you guys. We've been through a lot. We have a lot more to go through. We've learned different things about each other, and it seems like we're in unity. We're not divided. And I'm ready. Let's go. We can do it.
After exceeding the required number of signatures, the parents decide to deliver the first ever parent trigger petition to their district on December 7th.
I think we should go early in the morning, like at 8 or 9.
Yeah.
We have to make sure that when we submit the petitions, that those petitions will be valid and certified as valid by the district.
We had almost every major news company just camped outside the school. It was a pretty intimidating, atmosphere.
We want to thank you for this law, the parent trigger, that gives us the power as parents, Lord, to better the education of our children. We come before you and we ask you, Lord, that you give us grace before the school district, Lord.
I felt this power in my hands that I could make this change.
I was just shocked. I remember when I shook her hand, she was shaking. So then I kind of held on her hand a little bit because it was like a very, intense kind of situation. She's, representing what she thinks is best for her, and I'm representing, the district.
I felt like important. I felt like them.
It was a very, very, very intense experience.
Welcome to the stage, Campbell Brown, Shirley Ford, and Gloria Romero.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I should probably start by saying what you just saw was a clip. Am I buzzing a little bit? Okay, I won't speak so loud. It was a clip of a documentary called We the Parents, and it was about an attempt by parents to take over their school in Compton. And we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about what happened there because these two women are the experts. Let me first say I'm honored to be on stage with them because they have succeeded at identifying and implementing ways to overcome what is probably one of the biggest challenges of the education reform movement, and that is getting parents involved, deeply engaged, and ultimately empowered. And to reference what John Podesta said over lunch today, it's this coalition building with parents especially that really matters. You'd think that would be a lot easier. You'd think parents would have a sense of what's going on in their schools, especially if it's a failing school. That's not always the case, we know. Parents, more likely than not, probably only interact with the teacher of their child. I mean, they're certainly not interfacing with the policymakers and lawmakers in this room about what's really happening. And if they do know that there is a problem, then they are most likely feeling powerless about how to do anything about it. And what parent trigger laws are is, or what we hope they will be, is a way to really empower parents and give them a way out, a hope of a means of change. And that's what we're going to focus on today. Just very briefly, so you know where I'm coming from as a moderator, I'm not exactly unbiased when it comes to this issue. I had a 14-year career as a television journalist, and I always tried to play it straight and present both sides of any given issue. I certainly never thought of myself as a partisan. And then I had 2 kids, and I started thinking about education a lot, and I started writing about it a little. And I discovered that, yes, there are 2 sides to this issue and to education reform in general. There is a right side and there is a wrong side. And in my city of New York and in my state of New York, the unions own far too many politicians. And with all due respect to Mr. Podesta about the need for us to all work together here, what I see is a union commitment to maintaining the status quo, a failed system that is doing irreparable harm to our children. I also look at our mayoral candidates right now in New York City who are paying extraordinary deference to the United Federation of Teachers, and it makes me want to cry. So I believe as a journalist, as a writer, and most certainly as a mother, we cannot sit silently, and we should be speaking out about this in every way possible, and I do not think that a change in the tone is what's going to solve this problem. So let's get started, and I just want to, before we do, also thank Governor Bush for inviting me here, who I think is one of the greatest leaders we have on this issue, and many others, but we'll leave that to the political reporters. So. Shirley, I think probably the best way to start off is to have these 2 women tell their stories, their journeys of how they got here. Shirley's especially was very personal in what brought you to being an activist and what really radicalized you, and take us through it.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting us to be here. And before I get started, I'd just like to acknowledge my teammates, is what I choose to call them, because we're in the struggle together from Parent Revolution. Can you just please stand and stand so everyone in the room can see who you are? Thank you so much. Thank you. Wow, let me try and tell a little bit about my story. My story is extremely intense and very emotional, so I'm not going to cry today.
You're already
Give me
crying.
a second. Oh boy. Looking at that video and just thinking about those parents, and the one mom has stage 4 cancer, and she actually had cancer as we were going through that campaign, and couldn't even get medical help. So it was such a struggle. It was such a challenge for those parents. But just a little bit about me, and what started me in the struggle is looking in the eyes of 2 young children and saying that, I'm sorry, saying that I wanted better for them than I had for myself, and taking a look around my neighborhood and my choices, and I didn't have very many choices. Limited resources to help me to be able to get them out of the dropout factory, as I choose to call it today. So my story and my struggle began with having hope, knowing that I could make a difference and that I wanted more for them than I had for myself, or even thinking back to my mother, even having a 3rd grade education, that God, I have to do better by my children. They have to get out of the community. They have to go on to university. They have to be successful. They have to be okay in life. And then thinking, God, who's going to take care of me when I get old and can't take care of myself? So that's a part of my struggle, and just being enraged about my community, waking up every day, seeing the graffiti on the walls, seeing the little candles and the little teddy bears and the little shrines, where the next day there have been some type of gang violence with a murder or something in the community, and just seeing children just going to prisons, and just seeing moms like myself just being worn out. And as you'll see in the movie, when Viola Davis said that someone told her that people are projecting how many prison beds that they're building based on third grade reading scores. Well, someone told me the same story long ago, and I never forgot that. I never, ever, ever forgot that. And I said to myself, my two sons would not be a product of a prison. They will go on to a university and they will be successful. And I just want to give a shout out to both of them that they're both at a university now, first generation in the family.
But that happened because you took some pretty extreme measures to get them out of the neighborhood you were in and to try to find other choices in order to give them something better. And even those choices you found were subpar. I did. I had the attitude of by any means necessary that we would be okay as a family. And I did extreme measures to go as far as to use someone else's address to enroll them into a middle school that I thought by far, because it was further on the west side of town in a better neighborhood, that they would have a better education there. And after becoming empowered and learning a little bit more about the system and the API scores and the program improvement as we use in California to measure schools, I was totally enraged because the school that I had done all of that to put them in was as low performing as the school in my neighborhood. The only thing was that the school was in a safer, nicer community. And were you alone during this? I mean, were there other parents with you, or did you feel like you were doing this by yourself?
At this particular time, I felt that I was doing this by myself. When they graduated from middle school and was ready to go into high school, that was when I started to meet other groups of parents that had the same stories as myself, and that was just saying we will do anything by any means necessary to get our children into a high school that will be safe, to where people will believe that they could learn, and they will go on to college, yes.
We're going to get more into Parent Revolution and what you're doing now, but I want to go to Gloria and have you kind of walk us through your very interesting transition over the years to where you are now.
Okay, thank you so much. And let me thank Governor Bush for putting together this extraordinary summit. I think it recognizes that it matters not if we're Democrats, Republicans, Independents. This is really about an issue that America must deal with, and all of us need to sit down to figure out a strong path forward. How I got into this was my mother had a 6th grade education. I ended up earning a PhD. I ended up becoming the chair of the Senate Education Committee, but I always remembered the fight of my mother, and she understood that education is what lifts us out of poverty. She knew that if all of her children, there were 6 of us, and her hope was that we would graduate from high school. That was her hope, and I never forgot that. And later, when I became a senator and I was moving through committees, I saw the same dreams from moms like Shirley and so many others. This is an American story. In looking at this, I believed, and when I was in the Senate, I was the Democratic majority leader. I was the caucus chair. I was the head of the Education Committee. I'm a member of my own union. I'm affiliated with the California Teachers Association, which is the most powerful political force in California. But I kept seeing union dues going to fight against everything that I was advocating for. And I think that what I began to see was that laws like parent trigger or parent empowerment laws, ultimately, we wouldn't need them if we didn't have an education system it's based on zip code. It's 5 degrees of separation from the American dream. Those 5 digits that begin to tell us which side of the tracks we live on and what our opportunities may be in terms of educational aspirations and outcomes. I also served as the chair of the Prison Reform Committee, and part of my background in writing the parent trigger law was being in too many prisons in California, for nothing that I myself have done, by the way, just want to make that clear, and seeing the statistics. 70% of inmates without a high school diploma. Kids in prisons And I believe in personal responsibility, but you have to do the math. Not being able to read, not graduating, looking at that correlation. If we don't educate, we will incarcerate. So when I looked at this and ultimately making the decision to write this, I knew that this was going to be essentially a Nixon goes to China moment. And for those legislators in the room, I think we really have to think about, are we willing to take on our own political parties? Being a fervent Democrat, but understanding this is about a bipartisan movement to give parents like my mother, kids like myself, moms like Shirley, the opportunity to live the American dream. I think it's got to come from the gut.
So explain to people who don't know what parent trigger is, recognizing that the law is a little bit different in different states, but California was leading the charge and you wrote the law in California.
Absolutely. I wrote the law. I often told people it's a law I never should have had to have written. It's a common sense law, and when I think about parent trigger, essentially, I think that part of it's fervor. The reason that people feel so excited about this law is that it basically tells us to think back to even the foundations of our government, our democracy. It's about the people. It's about the people's right to petition our own government when our government fails us. This is about we, the parents. It's about understanding that there are federal laws. There are strong laws on the books, and I give a lot of credit to No Child Left Behind and the forcing of districts to open the books and look at data. That is, to me, the strongest part of NCLB. And as part of No Child Left Behind, the opportunities there and the federal laws to turn around and transform schools that are chronically underperforming. Not just failing one year, but chronically underperforming. What I saw in Sacramento, though, when I was a legislator, was that these watch lists were maintained in Sacramento. And, names of schools, thousands of schools in California, their name would just be added to the list. And then we would just sit back and watch it like watching paint dry. Nothing was ever done. Some schools were on that list for 14 years. It's outrageous. I mean, this longer than the shelf life of a typical K through 12 student. So, I got mad. I represented East LA. Too many of my own constituents were stuck in these chronically failing schools. So I basically said, well, look, if you who have the power are not going to transform the schools, then you know what? We'll take it to the people. And at the time, because I do recognize that nobody ever writes a law by themselves, there was an alignment, but there's a recognition, I think, and a willingness to say, I'm going to go ahead and cross the aisle. I'm going to reach out on a bipartisan basis. At that time, President Obama was calling for race to the top. The Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and I had worked on prison reform. This was the other end of the coin, to work on education reform. I went to my Senate Democratic President, Darrell Steinberg, and told him, didn't ask him, I just told him, I am going to run this. And then I went to my Republican Vice Chair, Bob Huff, of the Education Committee, and asked him, will you deliver your Republican caucus? Because I knew as a Democrat that I was going to have to pull teeth to get my own party on board. And so it was a coalition. And we began to write it, and we began to form it. And basically, the law simply says that if the bureaucracy won't make the changes under federal law, then if parents organize from the actual school that is chronically underperforming or from feeder schools that go into that district, if 50% plus one sign a petition, a John Hancock, a We the People, and present it to their governing body, that parents themselves can trigger the change on behalf of their children. It really is a very simple law based on the most timeless principle of this country, that we, the people, have the right to petition our government, and when our own elected officials don't act, we, the people, will. The Wall Street Journal called it the most revolutionary law you've never heard of at the time, but a whole lot more people have heard of it since. That's the law, and I think that the part of the excitement about this is that it is so simple, it's revolutionary.
And has been unanimously endorsed by the Mayor's Conference, bipartisan support around the country, and got more attention, I think, for the general public from a movie that was inspired by the law that came out of this fall. And we have a little clip of that. It's just about 2 minutes we're going to show you.
We're late, go, go,
This
go.
school doesn't care.
I care.
Ow.
Try it again.
Remember, we worked on this.
I can't wait. With 10,000 studies about how being poor affects education, I can tell you being poor sucks and my kid can't read.
I'm gonna get you out of there.
This story is about two women who both have children who are struggling in school.
My character's name is Nona Alberts, and she is a second-grade school teacher.
Dare to read, think, speak, and write. Who wrote that?
The public school system is not working for them.
They're drawn together because how their children are educated is the most important thing. You want to take over this school with me?
This could be our chance to be the teachers we always hoped to be.
Are you the one out there leading the charge?
I played Jamie Fitzpatrick. She's not somebody who grew up political.
I'm trying to explain to you why your kid's tanking.
I wanted it to be surprising that that would be the person that would risk everything to change her daughter's school.
I admire your ideals, but Malia will suffer for them.
Don't use my daughter to scare me.
The aim is to try to inspire people to take an active interest.
All gonna work a little harder, me included.
This movie emphasizes that education is of utmost importance.
We're not here for teachers and parents. We're here for our kids.
Anyone who ever has a vision can inspire a whole generation.
We are taking back our schools. Go out there and fight for something better.
If you can educate a generation of children, you could change everything.
So if you haven't seen the movie, by all means do. It's, I wish it had done a little better at the box office, but it was very inspiring and shows you, I think, how strong the opposition is and what you're up against, even just in trying to get that law passed in California. And you were a part of that fight too, Shirley. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I was a part of that fight, and it was interesting. I saw things that I never thought possible. I heard things that I never thought possible. I heard how, oh, parents don't understand, we don't have the education to do anything with a parent trigger bill. We're not educators, as if we didn't care about our children. It was an extremely brutal fight to me, and I was on the inside. I was one of the main parents that walked the halls, was in and out of Senator Romero's office, testified, cried, got angry. And I looked to the left of me, and I would have thought that the PTA would have been beside me. I'm not PTA bashing when I say this. It's just one of the things that always come to mind as growing up and having kids in elementary school, and the schools that did have the PTAs and being a part of them, they were always there. I paid my dues. And then when we got into the struggle with parent trigger bills, to see that the PTAs were on the opposite side of what we were fighting for was another level of awareness of how the system is and how the status quo is. And walking the halls with the lobbyists, with the CTA lobbyists in California became quite interesting. We got to know each other by first name. I was referred to as a lynch mob, you know, so all kinds of awful things happened during the fight and the struggle to get this bill passed.
And Gloria, what ultimately did it? I mean, what got you over the hump?
It was understanding, I think, for legislators in the room as well, that, I mean, the movie's great, but that's Hollywood. And they even throw in a love story. No such love story occurred during the writing of this law, at least to my knowledge. I don't know, Shirley, what about you? But this was mano a mano. This was a hard-fought battle. But to me, the most important thing was putting kids first, was understanding that we were going to take on the biggest political force in California, the California Teachers Association. We walked into that knowing that. I also knew as a Democrat, having served as majority leader, that I was going to take on my own party. I knew as well, though, that it was such a common sense idea. We knew that if we could get this out of our house, out of the Senate, that we could fly with it, we could run with it. But I knew that we had to craft a bipartisan approach. So that's really was the key. It was understanding that nobody's going to do it by themselves. Figuring out a way to move it forward. If we're honest and we're willing to make a change for the good of our kids, to make a change for the good of our state, to simply turn around chronically underperforming schools, we were going to have to come together. But then we didn't stop there. What we did as well was I recognized we had to put together a civil rights coalition. So we reached out, and Shirley was a fundamental part of this. We went to ministers. We asked them to join with us. And there were times even when some of these ministers prayed with some very weary Democratic legislators who were just gutless, quite frankly, afraid to do the right thing for kids. We also knew that we had to work editorial boards. Having served as majority leader, you have to know the rules of the House. So I also knew how many votes, how to count them, and when to call that vote. And once you get the number of votes, you call the vote, you take it up, you move it forward, you muscle it through. And actually, we ended up surprising our opposition. But we knew that it was going to be brutal and mean and ugly. It was, I got called into my own Democratic caucus at one time. I was screamed at by my colleagues asking me why I was putting them through this. And I kept thinking, we have kids in California, a serious achievement gap. We've got thousands of schools on these watch lists. This isn't about us. It's about providing opportunities for our kids. So I think it really was a tenacity from the people involved. The NAACP, the state chapter, the state chair, she had been a former union organizer. She knew in her gut what was going on. I really believe that this law would have never come to fruition had it not been for the tenacity of Alice Huffman and the NAACP. So it was putting together the coalition, working on a bipartisan basis, nothing romanticized about it, but really grueling work and endless hours of sitting there and negotiating. The final negotiations, I remember New Year's Eve, 2009, I was on the phone all day, New Year's Eve, well into the evening with the then Speaker of the Assembly, negotiating the final language to write into the bill so we could enact it. But it was hard.
And I'd just like to add that Ben Austin, the executive director, I'm thinking back to the beginning of this concept. Him running around and, we need to have a parent trigger bill. I don't even think we even called it a parent trigger bill then, but it was this concept that we could give the same power to parents as teachers already had, as Locke High School was a teacher-led transformation of that very low-performing dropout factory. So the idea was interesting to me, and I remember I would come into the office, and I didn't want to do anything but hang with Ben and, work on this idea about parent trigger. So I remember 3 people that were very, very instrumental in all of this, and I call them my heroes, is Ben Austin, Senator Gloria Romero, and Karen Bass, Assemblywoman Karen Bass, finally, after some coalition building, some meetings and some community meetings, and guess who showed up to dinner? I'm sitting there while she was defending herself to leaders in the community. We became what I like to think best friends, to where she was like, I'm going to support this. I'm going to help get the votes. Here is my cell number. And so it was, and then Alice Huffman, Margaret Fortune, and I don't want to leave anyone out, but definitely Ben Austin and Senator Romero and Karen Bass.
Okay, not to be too, it's very uplifting to get it passed, but implementation, whole nother story. And a battle that's still very much being fought. But the first attempt is Compton. Talk a little bit about that. You guys were both involved in that. What happened in Compton? The lessons that were learned there that maybe can be applied to future attempts at getting this implemented.
So Compton, we did not actually win the Parent Trigger campaign, but to me, in my mind, and to those parents you just saw on the video, it was a win because guess what? We went into Compton, knocked on doors, and we empowered parents. Some of the parents have never even left out of the community to go to other areas in Los Angeles. So it was a win. Parent Revolution as a whole, we learned a lot of lessons. And I think if we had clear guidelines with the regulations, we're going on temporary regulations, because once the law was passed, it seemed as if Sacramento didn't do the things that they needed to do, the State Board of Ed, to hurry up so that we could implement the law in the next cycle. So we went out and we did what we thought was correct, and we learned a lot of lessons from that. But I will say that parents in Compton, California will never be the same. They are empowered, they have the knowledge, and they will not go for the things that has happened there in that district for 20 years or more.
I think that there's laws, and then there are the regulations that interpret the law. You don't write everything in a law itself, and that's why you have State Board of Education and other regulators to basically decide sort of the fine print of the law itself. And I think that I was just amazed at the strength of the parents. Remember, this was a law that had never been done before. It hadn't been done. So that we were in uncharted territory. There was also tremendous opposition. There was a real also sort of smarting once the law had been enacted and Governor Schwarzenegger signed the law. There was this intense sort of almost, we're going to get you from the opposition. Parents, courageously, you saw some of them, and it was so good to see their images again. They took the risk of believing in this law that had been written for them. And they stood up to take the first steps forward. Many of them faced threats. Many of them faced intimidation. Many of them were faced with threats about being deported. Many of them found their own school children crying in the classroom because establishment district folks were basically telling their kids, why is your mother doing this? It was warfare, quite frankly. And none of that should have happened. That's a shame on what was occurring, but it was there. The other thing, though, too, that was occurring was that we were in the midst of a political shift as well, with the new governor on board and the sacking of what had been a reform-minded State Board of Education, and the replacement, quite frankly, with some folks who hadn't supported. Ben Austin was replaced with a very CTA lobbyist who had walked the hallways opposing the measure. So it gives you a little something of what we were dealing with. So there was confusion in the regulations. Admittedly, there were mistakes in the writing of the petition. I mean, I'm somebody who, you know, if the regulation says put a staple in the left-hand corner, then put a staple in the left-hand corner, because if you are up against that kind of an opposition, they will come at you with every little technicality, and that's what they did. Unfortunately, the technicalities, found that the petitions were basically thrown away. It was unfortunate, given all the work. But I look back at that first proud chapter, and I'm very honored to have ridden that bus with so many of the parents on the day that the petitions were first presented to the district officials, saying, we, the parents, are the first parents in this nation to basically say, transform our schools, because if you won't do it, we will. And I give them every courage for standing up through all of this time.
So I want to add that the fight did not stop with getting the bill passed. We continued to get on buses. It was just simply amazing how parents would bring their children in their pajamas, and how we would take 2 busloads of parents. We would ride all night to Sacramento to be the first ones in the boardroom of the State Board of Ed, so that we could dominate the boardroom, so that we could demand that they gave us clear guidelines, regulations for the bill. It's just simply amazing. And the ride from Los Angeles to Sacramento is 6 hours, how we would ride all night, get there, get coffee, get breakfast, and go all day, and then head back to LA in the afternoon. But they never gave up. They never gave up. And I think that they're the unsung heroes of all of this.
So talk a little bit about Desert Trails, which hopefully is going to be a success story, or at least so far. Where do things stand? This is the second real attempt at implementation, also in California. Just give us a sense of where it is at the moment.
Desert Trails is a success story. It is definitely a success story. Desert Trails, the parents in Adelanto faced a lot of the same opposition. They did it a little bit different. Their petitions were correct. They had a stapler, they had a date box, all of the things, you know. So we definitely learned from what we went through in Compton, and Desert Trails is a success story. There are many heroes there. After all of that, after educating the parents going through trainings, Parent Revolution organizers, not the ones going out knocking on the doors, parents leading the charge, the union still came in and bulldozed the whole campaign over a 3-day weekend and did rescission campaigns. There is no rescission in the Parent Trigger Bill. Well, at least that's controversial. But anyway, so here we go again, seeing the same things all over again. So fortunately, there's a law firm that committed to taking the parents' case pro bono as long as they are in the fight. So here we go back to court again. And the good thing about it, that a judge, for the first time probably in history, ruled on the side of the parents against the union and the school districts. So today, Desert Trails is a success story. They are in the implementations. They've gone through an RFP process to choose their charter school. And mind you, charter was not their first choice. They tried to work with the district, and the district just slammed the door in their faces and did not think that they would be winners. So they've gone through the RFP process, they've chosen a charter school, and they are on track to having a successful school in the coming school year.
That's great. That's
Yes.
great. I want to have time to take questions from the audience, so be thinking about what you may want to ask them. But Gloria, just before we wrap up, to just take it one step beyond Parent Trigger and talk about what else. I mean, what else we can do to get parents engaged, what other options there are.
Absolutely. Remember, I started this premise by believing that this was a law I should have never had to have written. And I think it does go back to zip code. It goes back to residency laws. As we sit in this room today, there's a father in Philadelphia, Mr. Hamlet Garcia, who is being charged with a felony for stealing a public education. We are seeing a new crime wave in America where mothers and fathers desperate to break the code because they know when they are in a school where their children don't have an opportunity to succeed. And parents will fight. Parents will go out of the zip code. And you shouldn't be labeled a felon or a criminal for simply trying to find a good school. So I think, and when I wrote the Parent Trigger Law, it was part of Race to the Top. I stuffed in there as much as I could on parent rights. This is about parent power, not just simply parent participation, but parent power, new rights to parents, open enrollment, going beyond zip code, looking at quality charter schools. I mean, I'm proud that, Oxford Preparatory School in California is one of the highest performing charter schools in the nation, and these are largely Latino and African American children. But the old stereotype, they can't learn, the soft bigotry of low expectations. So I think we're looking at going beyond it. Parent Trigger resonates because parents are trapped. But I really think the bigger prize in all of this, Parent Trigger is one step in the larger issue of looking at real choice and taking that as far as we can, by any means necessary, to give parents the right to do it. You shouldn't have to be rich in America to have your child in a good performing school. And so I think that the next challenge is to go beyond. As a Democrat, people will sometimes say, how can you say that? And yet I will look back at even some of the forgotten history of Democrats, McGovern, Humphrey, as well to even in taking a look at some of their platforms on, dare I say, vouchers in education. We sort of conveniently forget our history when the big political player comes on board. But if this is a civil rights fight, and Democrats often like to talk about civil rights fights, if this is a civil rights fight, then I'm not going to stop until we really take on the whole question of residency, and no longer should we say which zip code determines where you happen to go to school. I mean, we don't accept that on where you buy a home. You can worship in the church of your choice. You can take your child to any preschool. You can go enroll in any college in California, for example, but only when it comes through K through 12, suddenly, you got to stay in your neighborhood. You have to stay in your zip code. If every neighborhood school was functioning, we wouldn't have an issue. But we know they're not. And then when you start doing the correlations of who's suffering, that to me is where we need to take this fight. And I'm willing to participate with anybody who will take that fight on.
And I think we need to have the right to change our schools and our neighborhoods, because when you change the school, you start to change your neighborhood.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we have about 15, 20 minutes probably. And maybe there's a mic floating around? Yes, there are a couple of microphones floating around. So just wave your hand and we'll direct them to you. Let's start up here and then back over there.
Hi, Shirley. Can you, or Senator Romero, can you give us some examples when the petitions were delivered to the school board in Desert Trails? What did the school board do to knock out some of the parents' signatures? Give the audience some examples.
Well, the school board had actually made their decision before the school board that night with the petitions. They went through rescissions, was a portion of knocking out the total number of the petitions. Parent is not in school, not legal guardian, so there were quite a few things that the school board went through when they were validating the signatures. But I never will forget the night that the petitions were presented to the school board, that they made their decision. It seemed as if they had had a meeting prior to us getting there to the school board that night. We walked into the room and all of the seats were taken up. So I got there early. Most of the union, people that were part of the union there, they were coming out, they were taking a break and they were coming out. And all of the seats had something on the seats that they were reserving the seats for the school board. They were all happy. So they knew the decision, what was gonna happen, I believe, before we did. So I walked into the room and I started to take things off of the seats and put things on the seats and say, these are Parent Revolution, these are Adelanto parents, because I kind of got that feeling, oh, this is not gonna go down right tonight. So it was awful. The school board members actually really badgered the parents way more than they did in Compton. They actually, it was just criminal the way that they treated the parents that got up to speak that night.
Right. And also what they did too was, to a large extent, they stopped the clock. I mean, basically petitions were submitted, and so there's sort of essentially a stopping of the clock to try then to intervene to basically conduct psychological warfare. Do you really want to do this? What's the impact on your kid? You're going to have, basically the adults without jobs in the schools. Do you really want your teacher to lose the job? No parent should have to go through that. These are laws on the books of the state of California. But one thing that also happened in between, where Adelanto, the ante was raised, because between Compton and Adelanto, we now began to see different actions, some 30 states beginning to look at it. And each state is different, as it should be. Because to me, the concept of parent trigger, I'm not interested in just seeing the way it was written in California. That's the way it should be in every other state. Quite frankly, we had to write it in a hurry. And if I had more time to go back, I would have made changes in how we wrote the parent trigger law. But it's exciting to see each legislature with their own political realities put their own brand on this. It's an idea. Parent trigger is an idea. It's an empowerment piece. But there was quite a lot of efforts to try to destabilize and then to question and throw out honest to goodness petitions that had been gathered.
And a lot of this happened over the 3-day weekend to where they went in and knocked on every single parent's door that had signed a petition. And I remember we were sitting in the office of the Adelanto parents, and that's why young eyes are really good. We have this really young, energetic person at our office, so he's sitting on the floor, and we're looking at all of the rescission campaigns, and he discovers something in the signatures and the top rescission papers. So we discovered a lot of fraud and a lot of signatures that were invalid with the rescission campaign. So it was a mess, but it was expected.
Yeah, sorry, right here.
I wanted to follow up on what you said about how you did the parent trigger, and there were some things you would have done differently. I wonder if you could tell maybe for other states that are considering parent triggers. Sorry, I wonder maybe if you could tell for other states that are considering parent triggers. I know every state's different, but some key things as far as what you did or what you might have changed, or things to consider when the states consider doing parent triggers in their own.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to work with you as well. In fact, Governor Bush, I'm actually hoping that we can convene the first National Parent Trigger Summit to bring together a working group of how it's done, bring together every single governor who's had the courage to sign this, legislators on both sides of the aisles to think it through. But I think most importantly, it really is working off of No Child Left Behind. It's a very simple, I think, translation to the state level. If we had had more time in California, I think perhaps we could have done more in the body of the law itself rather than leaving it to the implementation of state regulators. I think that is key. Certainly clarifying this whole issue of rescissions, because that will come up, and trying to, I believe that there should be a period of rescission, but once the petitions are turned in, no more. Then basically game over, and there should be some consequences then for trying to interfere in this process of utilizing the law. There are different things that can be done, but I think that what a good next step would be to bring legislators together to really take a look at options for that particular state. One glove doesn't fit all. Some states have charter schools that are operated by both for-profit and also nonprofit operators. I'm not interested in rewriting charter laws for each state, and that's where I think that each state can make their own decision as to how it applies in their states. But a national convention, I think it would be just exciting to see something like that happen and bring people together. I'd love to see a parent trigger law in every state of the nation. That's what I would love to see. And it all started in California.
So would I.
Right here.
So it's really fascinating to see, power to the people in action. It's really quite something. But the devil is in the details, and implementation is everything. And one of the dangers of ever doing something revolutionary is that the results make it even worse, or are so bad that it kills the thing before it's even born. So I'm very interested in knowing the next step in the process. So the trigger has been, shot, whatever, and you have a group of parents who I understand are now putting out an RFP for a charter organization to run the school. How does that process work? Who leads the process? What choices do the parents have? Is it a group of parents? Is it the leaders of the original movement? How does that work?
So the core group of parents, in particular in Desert Trails, the core group of parents will be a part of the body that will be sitting on a board of directors that will be working with the charter school that has taken over. But from your question about the details of it, when you're looking at it, and I'm answering this as a parent, when I'm looking at the failure of the school, sometimes you go down so far that you can't go any further. The only thing you can do is look up and hope that something else gets better. And as parents are partners with the new people that take on the school, whether it be charter, whether it be the district, or whatever, there is a part there that the parents have the right to be partners in the school and not just drop your children off and come and do bake sales, et cetera, but you have a real voice. You're at the table, the decision-making table, and parents and administrators and teachers are in this journey together. It can only work this way.
And I think also, too, that it's important with parent trigger laws to really recognize that parents should be the architects of their children's educational futures. It does underscore that parents, who are the taxpayers in this district, need to have not only a participatory role, but real rights in making sure that the school succeeds. In terms of the actual running of the school, this is where I do think there's some confusion, and I would clarify it, at least as I envision parent trigger law, is that basically parent trigger law is really not so much about the running of the school, but about triggering of change. Because remember, all the parent trigger law did, and it's a big thing, but all it did was to give that right to make the transformation that superintendents have right now, that teachers have right now, to parents. So it's about making the decision under No Child Left Behind. We've got a number of options. Do we shut the school down? Do we turn it into a charter? Do we reconstitute staff? Do we fire the principal? It's making the decision. But the actual running, that is not so much the role of the parents. But they are going to be a constant participatory body, as any parent in any school should be, whether the school is performing in an exemplary fashion or whether it was chronically underperforming like it was at McKinley or in Adelanto. Because a lot of the parents, they've been criticized saying, well, who are you? How can you run a school? Parents really aren't asking to do that. But they're saying, we know this school is failing, and under federal law, you have these options right now to turn it around, but if you don't trigger it, we will, but then the process unfolds. So with Adelanto, they decided then to go charter, and at that point, bring in a group that will actually run it, et cetera, but parents will continue to play a very important role and have a responsibility to ensure that our schools succeed and no school is just left to fail. That's the role, I think.
Right here.
Good afternoon, Nancy Spence, State Senator from Colorado. In Colorado, I carried the parent trigger bill in the Senate after it passed the House with a Republican majority in the House. I didn't have that advantage in the state Senate. And even after raising the threshold to 75% of parents, it still failed in the Senate. I felt at the time that if I raised the threshold to 75%, I could come back the next year and fix it. I just wanted to get something on the books. But the most important message I have is, I think to many people, parent trigger sounds like a right-wing Second Amendment bill. And that doesn't have a lot of appeal for Democrats, at least in Colorado. So I would suggest that if someone is carrying the bill in another state, it might be called the Parent Empowerment Bill.
And thank you so much for that. If you actually look at the Race to the Top legislation, actually where parent trigger is, it actually is called the Parent Empowerment Act. And so you're right, sort of parent trigger is a little bit more sort of like the common name, colloquial name, but we actually did call it the Parent Empowerment Act.
Hey, my name is Kim Kendall, and I'm here with Jill Flores. We're from Florida. We've advocated many parent initiatives and actually have had union leaders, and we call them the Angry Mom Group, come and tell us, why are you advocating the parent trigger law? Number one, they didn't speak English. That's why they got so many signatures on their petitions. They said, we don't need it in St. Johns County. We're #1 in FCATS because our schools are so great. We bring to their attention that we all moved from Duval County to St. John's to get better schools. It's not fair for those who can't afford to put a for sale sign in their yard. And then they get in, start messaging that it's for-profit charter schools. I really don't care. I don't know where competition became an ugly word. But my biggest question, and we're not going to back down. We get prank calls. We've gotten letters in our mailboxes, all sorts of fun stuff. I have an air horn next to my phone, so that's stopped now. But we have over 3,000 emails already of parents statewide, and we're continuing to network that. What messages, because we are up against the unions and teachers, and when they say choice, and there's so many messages, and I want to just tell them so many things. What have been your top, like, 1 or 2 bullet points that have really resonated with the parents? And I would like to also talk with y'all afterwards to find if we can do like a video clip or something like that that we can add to our website.
I think with parents, it's one where we talked about children. I mean, we kept hearing so often, and I would hear a lot, parents don't care. And then I would hear, oh, they don't speak English. Or the worst thing, poor parents, poor kids can't learn. And that should be the biggest insult. Nobody should ever accept this argument that poor kids can't learn. Because that's where I say that's personal to me. I'm that kid that grew up on the other side of the tracks, and my family didn't have money. So I think, if anything, we go back and we talk about what do you want for your child. I really believe most parents want their kids to succeed. Parents understand the American dream. And immigrant parents in particular understand the reasons why they came to this country. I even think, too, a lot of union members, a lot of classified members, they understand the reason they're mopping floors and cleaning toilets. It's not because they love the job, but they understand that they want a better life for their children. So we would reach out, and I think it's really phrasing it as an American dream, better opportunity, a civil rights issue. It's what makes us equal. And as Shirley pointed out as well, too, the stronger the school, the more vibrant the economy of the state. We tried not to present it as something that was against the union. Remember, I'm a union member as well, but nonetheless, political forces were not going to have it. They just went out and labeled it. I think it's just, we've got to just have one more petition, one more voice, one more day. Together, I really believe that we can prevail. The interesting thing is that when we've seen public opinion polling on the parent trigger laws and parent empowerment acts, the public gets this. Public supports choice. Public supports parent rights. We demand responsibility, but responsibility has to be accompanied with rights for parents. So as long as we go sort of above and beyond the political forces and connect with the public, I think we can be successful.
So I just want to add to that, and I don't think I really know the answer now, and I think it just dazzles me when I hear people say, oh, they don't speak English, they won't understand. So I'm always thinking in my mind, then, if they didn't speak English to sign the petition, they didn't speak English to enroll their child in your school. So what is the difference? And I keep thinking that, and I haven't figured that one out yet, and that's a bunch of baloney. And with our campaign, we have people that speak Spanish.
We probably have time for one more. Go ahead.
I'm John DeBerry from Tennessee, House Representatives. I want to ask the Senator, you mentioned that when you were trying to get this bill passed, that you received a lot of opposition. Well, we've made a tremendous amount of progress in the state of Tennessee, and oftentimes, in spite of many of the education organizations and some of our colleagues. So once the bill was passed and enacted, did they get on board? Did they come and start working with you? Did they change some of their opinions, or did they maintain the hard line?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, it was interesting. Later when I ran for office, some $4 million was thrown against me. My picture was put up on a website. I'm the evil person, et cetera, et cetera. But you know what? It's sort of like, the way I look at it is, I believe in public service. I was never a really good politician, but I think I was a hell of a public servant. And I think it's about convictions. I think it's about living up to that. I started with the story about my mother, and ultimately, I think it's about giving. It's about understanding that for those of us who serve in public office, what do we want to do? This is a law. There's thousands of laws that are written in California, but this law has ignited the imagination of people across the country. And if that's the law that I'm remembered for, I'm happy with that, because I think you see it making a difference in people's lives. So no, they didn't come back. I mean, Shirley either, right? Ben Austin, remember, he got sacked from the State Board of Education. But I think it's okay, because ultimately the history of the parent rights movement will be written. And I think in that sense, I think we're the good guys in that fight. And it's a good fight. It's a fight worth taking. I encourage any legislator in this room or parent or community supporter to take the risk, and we shouldn't even have to take the risk to put our kids first and to turn around chronically failing schools. But yet, sadly, with the political forces as they be, we are in a period of time in this country where that's what we have to do. And I think good people will rise to that challenge. So it's okay with me being labeled one of the bad people in California right now, because ultimately I think the story will be told in a little bit different fashion when we see parent trigger laws in every state in the nation.
On that note, thank you so much, Shirley, Gloria. Appreciate it.